I'm Jessica Entner.
And I'm Dan Eisenstein.
And this is 90who10. Today, I will be interviewing my co-host and getting to know him a bit better, Mr. Dan Eisenstein.
Hi.
We've been doing this back and forth, talking about this for a while. So it's great that we're finally getting to it. But what was one of the reasons we wanted to do this was we did have interesting upbringings and growing up in and around Beverly Hills, Los Angeles. What was it like for you? You were a lifer.
It's funny when you say that, like growing up in and around Beverly Hills, because whenever I would leave the Beverly Hills area as a kid and you would meet people and they'd be like, where are you from? I would say, oh, I'm from LA. They'd be like, where in LA? I'd be like, oh, like Westwood near UCLA kind of a thing. It was like this secret that you would try to keep because of, the stigma, positive, negative, whatever, that was attached to growing up in Beverly Hills. I mean, the assumptions that people would make,
right?
Some true, some not true, So that's like the first thing that comes to mind when you say, what was it like growing up in Beverly Hills?
So you wanted to hide it.
You would hold it back, a little bit. And then, look, you could use it to your advantage too. If you wanted to intrigue people or you wanted, right away, people are interested in that. It's a conversation piece. So, I mean, growing up in Beverly Hills is a in some ways, it's like growing up in any small town USA, just, with a little bit more wealth around you. And in some ways, it's just this super unique place. You're going to, I went to Beverly Hills Public Schools. I know you went to Beverly Hills High School. I don't know, elementary. Where'd you go to elementary?
I was half an LA kid, but
Okay.
I went to El Rodeo for 8th grade and then Beverly Hills High after.
Yeah, I went to El Rodeo pretty much kindergarten through 8th grade. And, you're going to school with other celebrity kids. You've got some neighbors who are celebrities. Also just, people who are just very successful in different industries and things.
Yeah. Did you have any famous celebrity neighbors?
Yeah, across the street was Billy Davis Jr. and Marilyn McCoo.
For those that don't know, Solid Gold. Solid Gold was a big thing for us growing up.
But even before that, they were in the Fifth Dimension, the two of them. The big song was Up, Up, and Away.
That's right. I forgot that.
And then Marilyn McCoo, she was the host of Solid Gold. But they were the nicest people. I lived on a small street. I have older brother and sister. When my brother was a kid, there was a lot of kids on the street. But when I was, a kid, I was the only kid on the street. And Marilyn would buy a one large candy bar on Halloween just for me, so she'd have something to give me on Halloween. And she was a sweetheart. They were the nicest people. Anytime I ever did anything in school where I had to sell something or anything, she always was super supportive of me. She's the nicest lady. My sister and I have both run into her a couple times in Beverly Hills. We moved off the street. They moved off the street, but we've run into them here and there, and they are just the sweetest, nicest people.
Oh, that's so funny. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Beverly Hills during Halloween, it was a thing, right? Walden, the witch's house.
Yeah.
And it was the 80s, toilet paper, all the things.
I kind of pseudo grew up on Walden because my grandmother lived on Walden for 55 years. My grandmother moved on to Walden in 1950. My grandmother moved to Walden, and then she lived there until she passed away in 2006. So she lived there over 55 years on Walden.
So that's interesting because I didn't realize that you were also second generation or third generation LA kid.
Well, my grandparents were from Europe, but they came here in, right around 38, 39. My mom originally lived on Lapeer and went to school at Horace Mann. And then in 5th grade, my grandparents moved to Walden, and my mom went to 5th grade. My mom went to Rodeo, and then she graduated Beverly in 58.
Oh my God. Okay. So she's also a Beverly alum.
My mom was,
Beverly Hills has always been a very nice area to live in, and it's always had a lot of wealthy people. So now that I know that I didn't even know this about you. I didn't know that your grandparents also lived in Beverly Hills. You came from a well-to-do family to begin with. Your mom was raised, in Beverly Hills.
Yep.
So what was that like for you? Because we do have very different backgrounds when it comes to family wealth.
Yeah.
I was mine fluctuated throughout my life. I would never consider my family wealthy, but I did consider your family wealthy. So how does that play out?
I come from a long line of success. It's, my my mom's dad was very successful. He was one of the first manufacturers of women's. He had in Italy, Milan, Italy, before they came here, before the war. He owned a zipper factory. Then when he came here, he was in textile schmata, they call it.
Yep, the
Jews,
schmata
right?
business. All the Jews were the
but
schmata business.
He was one of the first distributors of women's pants. Like in the 50s, women wore skirts and dresses. He was the first one to really make women's pants. And then my mom's brother ended up working for this guy as a summer job who owned something called Phylon. He invented something called Phylon plastic. My grandfather ended up buying the patent to Phylon plastic, and then years later sold it to Standard Oil of Ohio. And at that time made him one of the largest shareholders of Standard Oil of Ohio. So he was a pretty wealthy guy. And then my dad grew up with nothing, really. I mean, grew up in the Bronx in New York, not a lot of money. He went to NYU on an academic scholarship, and then to Harvard Law School on an academic scholarship. Became a U.S. attorney, and then went to work for MCA Records, and then ended up becoming an entertainment lawyer and then a business manager. So that was my dad's kind of career path. And
that's where our lives kind of cross a little bit, because your dad was a well-known business manager.
Yep.
My dad was a music manager that dealt with business managers.
Yep.
So there's a lot of crossover there. And I know that you and I throughout the years have talked about just like the amount of access we had to like famous people, but not really realizing that these people were famous. They were just people. I mean, we didn't have that wall in the same way. It was very much like these were people that would come to dinner parties or that your dad worked with. It wasn't it wasn't the same perceptions, because you saw them as real people. So growing up, when I met you, you were hanging with a bit of a celebrity crowd, so to speak. Talk about that, because that was interesting. I mean, I think at the time, both you and I probably hung out with more celebrities than we do now.
For sure.
I could. But I use the term celebrity loosely, because nowadays you could have a very successful Instagram account. But yeah, what was that like? Who were some of your friends? Because this is when we came into each other's lives.
Well, taking it back, as a teenager, I kind of had an acting bug and got into acting a little bit, and through that scene, hooked up with a few different people, and one of my best friends for the last 30 years is Dave Faustino, who was Bud Bundy on Married with Children. Another good friend of mine is Nick Adler, whose dad is Lou Adler. When we were teenagers, go ahead.
I was just going to say, who you might now know if you're watching Daisy Jones and the Six, because they threw out Lou Adler's name on the show. I just started watching it, and it's literally, the girl drives the same car my mom drove. It's all Sunset Boulevard. It's all whiskey, rainbow, Roxy. It's amazing. So if like, just to get an idea of like what areas we're talking about, that's also like,
it's interesting because Lou is kind of a in the shadows kind of guy, a behind the scenes kind of guy. But if his name is something that you're aware of, you will catch it in so many different places. I mean, he had his hand in so many different things. And so many different people have mentioned him in their books and stuff. Just Lou's, and he's a great guy. He's
just tell us who he was, because it is
Lou. God, he did so many different things. He owned a couple different record labels. He owned Ode Records and Dunhill Records. He produced Carole King Tapestry. He discovered the Mamas and the Papas. He discovered Cheech and Chong. He directed Cheech and Chong Up in Smoke. He produced the Rocky Horror Picture Show. He owned the Rainbow, the Roxy, and the whiskey, and probably a million other things that I can't even think of at this time. And a lot of people know him too, because for 30 plus years, he sat next to Jack Nicholson at the Laker games on the floor. Everybody's like, "Who's the guy with the beard next to Jack Nicholson?" That's Lou Adler. And Lou's a great guy, and his son Nick is one of my closest friends. And when I was 17 years old, Dave and Nick and I and another friend of ours, Robert Gavin, who was also a teen actor, we decided to start. We wanted to throw a party, and we did this party every Thursday night. We ended up calling it Ballistics. We were like, well, let's just do this for like the summer, and Lou owned the whiskey at the time, and he was nice enough to let us do it there. And for about just over 2 years, we had this weekly night that we did at the whiskey. and this one other club. There was a lot of teen actors. There was a lot of people who already had success. There was a lot of people who went on to success. And then, and then it's weird because even though, it was what you might call like a teen club, it really wasn't, because, the whiskey's all ages. They serve alcohol. Dave, through being on TV, he had quite a big reach. We'd have people like Eazy-E hanging out there, Bobby Brown hanging out there. A lot of people who you wouldn't think were hanging out with, like in a teen club, but it wasn't that. Like, I would describe it as anything but that.
As a young girl, I have a totally different perception of this, just so you know.
Yeah.
It was the 90s, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, what years were this? What year?
Started in 91 and went to 93. And, some of the cool things is like, we'd have a weekly rap contest there. And there was this kid who would come from Boyle Heights every week on the bus. This was not just Beverly Hills kids. It was, but kids from all over, like the greater LA area. People coming from Orange County, people coming from the Inland Empire. And it was a place where, people who just came for a love of hip hop music. There was no social media back then. It was all kind of word of mouth. Yeah.
Flyers.
It was a scene. There was a scene that you had to kind of have your ear to the ground to know what was going on. And there was this kid that came from Boyle Heights every week. We had a rap contest, this weekly rap contest. Every week, this kid won. He would just destroy everybody else. He was an unbelievable battle rapper. At the time, he was called Will 1X, but you guys would know him now as Will I Am from the Black Eyed Peas. Eazy-E was there because he was friends with, so our DJ was DJ Speed from NWA. He was part of their like NWA posse. Speed would bring Eazy up there. Eazy saw Will, signed him to Ruthless Records, and so the story goes. And the great thing about Will is he's kind of never forgot his roots. He's always credited us for helping get him discovered. And we're working on a documentary right now, and Will has been like super supportive. He's been a part of it. Taboo, who's also in the Black Eyed Peas, is producing it with us. Yeah, that's like one of the great stories. Robin Thicke was a little bit younger than us. He was probably like 14, 15 at the time.
He's my age, because I was friends with his brother. Yeah. And Robin, it's funny. We tracked down some early footage from Entertainment Tonight. Was there on opening night, and there's like young Robin dancing around and bopping around before we open. And the funny thing is, back then in the day, there was like, you had to have like a crew, right? And the name of our crew was I Thought You Knew Productions. We had this guy who used to hang out with us. His name was Zucchini, right? I remember Zucchini.
I
remember Zucchini.
I
loved him.
And he's a great guy. He's in our documentary too. And
he was good friends with Brennan Thicke as well. Robin and Brennan, they were good friends with him.
Okay, all right.
That's how I remember him.
Zoo would always say, I thought you knew, G. And we're like, all right, I Thought You Knew Productions. And one of like the big hip hop terms of the time back then was kick the ballistics. And so we ended up calling our weekly night Ballistics. Yeah, and we had this like jester who was our logo. It was great.
You guys also made an album, I remember.
There was a Ballistics album.
I told you.
I have it like 10 feet away from me. I remember.
Wait, hold on. Okay, hold on, because I haven't seen that cassette in a very long time. You might have to go grab it. I remember that it was legit like Tagger, like font.
Hold on, I'm going to stand up for 1 second.
Okay, you got it. You got to do this, because I remember that album. I remember playing it. I remember the first time you guys like cut that demo, and it must have been, I was a sophomore in high school. Let's see the cover of it. But I remember, I told you.
There?
Yeah, I remember that song. Yep, that's it. I was going to say it's got yellow and green and orange being like the primary. Yep.
And that was our logo. That was it right there. Yeah.
I remember that. I remember that well. It's interesting when you say that Will I Am, and there was a lot of these kind of celebrity kids, because at the time, there were a lot of young actors, right? There were specific schools in LA that kind of catered to like the Soleil Moon Frys and the Leonardo DiCaprios and the Robin Thicks and these kids that were more artistic and actually worked for a living. So that being said, they also had these kind of private clubs pop up, and there was Alfie's Soda Pop Club that you and I both remember.
Alfie's was before Ballistics.
Yeah. So a lot of the kids that had aged out of Alfie's or whatever, or they actually stopped doing them, I think, when I was like a freshman in high school. So like into the 90s, I just remember it being about ballistics. Curious to know though, because Fergie was also in Black Eyed Peas.
Yep.
And she was also in Kids Incorporated, which I remember.
And she was at ballistics.
Well. That's what I wanted to say. Did they meet back then? Was that something that might have manifested?
They didn't hook up as Black Eyed Peas at ballistics, but they were all both. Taboo was there, Apple was there, Will was there, and Fergie was there. You know, initially Will and Apple, who were best friends, they were with another guy named Mook, and they did something called At Band Clan. And then it later, you know, kind of morphed into Black Eyed Peas, and then they got Fergie involved. But Fergie was in a group called Wild Orchid.
With some other kids,
with two other people. Well, with Renee, who was in Kids Incorporated, who's now married to Robbie Wells, who was a star pitcher at Beverly High. He was 2 years older than me. Yeah, and like every girl had a crush on him. In fact, my ex-wife had a huge crush on him. And then Stephanie was in Wild Orchid. She was an actress who did a few guest spots on Married with Children and dated Dave for a while. So it's very incestual.
It's very incestual. And I think that's something that people don't realize. No matter how big LA really is, because it's a driving city, you kind of do know everyone. And I used to make this joke, which I think it's hilarious, but some people might not, that basically you needed to either go to Beverly or become a Scientologist in order to become successful. Because that is literally, you can walk around LA and like those two facets of people seem to always do very well.
Which is funny that it's funny that you say that, because I had an actor friend of mine who had some success, but his career had stalled a little bit. And I'm a pretty cynical person, you know. I don't go in for like religion or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And my buddy was like, "Look, everybody I know who's doing Scientology is working right now, and I really want to go, but I'm kind of afraid to get sucked in over there. You know, will you go with me?" And so I went with my buddy, and we took a course at Scientology, and yes, I've had a little bit of that experience. It's kind of funny.
I was very good friends in the late 90s with like the Mastersons and the Jason Lees. So I was exposed to the Scientology thing. I did not. I just said, you know what, let's just agree to disagree on our fundamental pedagogies and stuff like that.
I'll tell you a story about Danny. He was in a movie with Dave Faustino called Dirt Merchant. Three of us went to Cannes in '98 to promote and sell Dirt Merchant. And Danny got the call that the 70s show had been picked up. So at like 5 a.m. after partying all night, I ended up taking him to the airport so he can go back to New York for them to announce the 70s show. Danny's a good guy. I like that.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So you were an actor.
Yes.
And you also were in a very well-known film from back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about a little bit. Like, well, how did you get into acting? How did you fall into that? Like, this is part of your childhood. You know?
So I got into acting initially because it's kind of a funny story. My brother had made a small short film for like local access TV. I was in, agents saw it. I ended up, you know, doing some commercials and things after that. And then I kind of quit acting because I wanted to hang out with my friends. My sister became a casting director, and I went in on a Saturday to help her out. And the other casting director who had shared the office was casting a movie called Pump the Volume. And I just kind of like, for shits and giggles, went in to read for it. And I ended up getting cast in Pump the Volume. And that's how I met Robert Gavin, who introduced me to Dave Faustino. And that's how I kind of got into that scene a little bit. And then from there, you know, I was in a couple other little movies, and I did a lot of episodic television. And then, you know, I kind of got into partying and hanging out, and the acting thing went by the wayside, you know. And for a while I was trying to pursue, you know, behind the camera career, and then got married and got into real estate, and then, you know, got into club promotion and yeah.
Was it something that you liked doing, or was it just kind of like,
I loved it, but I wasn't serious enough about it.
Yeah. It is. It takes a lot of dedication.
Yeah.
So, okay, you've mentioned so many like interesting people that we did grow up with. And ironically, even though we went to high school together, we did run in like different circles growing up. I was not always a Beverly kid. I grew up all over Los Angeles, and just happened to know some of these people from my own random, like going to summer camp and stuff like that. But Robin Thicke, I was very good friends with his brother. We all know him from, you know, that amazing music video with, what's that girl's name Emily Ratajkowski. I mean, that's really, it's her music video at the end of the day. So what was he like back then?
There was a crew of us who hung out together. It was, you know, Dave Faustino, my friend Bo Borden,
Rainbow, he's the best.
Robert Gavin, Brian Green was a big part of that early group, like when I was like 15, 16. And Brian and Robin were really good friends. Robin was a couple years younger than us. Yeah, but he was like, the kid who like, there was a group of us who were like, 15, 16, 17. And then we had this like 14-year-old kid who was hanging out with us, Robin. And he kind of would like, do whatever to kind of entertain us. At that time, we thought it was, funny to make a 14-year-old drink a beer or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But Robin's a great guy. He's also part of our documentary. There's this like core group of us that everybody has gone on to different, levels of success. But it's been fun rallying around this project, and anybody who was involved or there at that time was like, yeah, of course we'll help you. It's been pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I remember it well. You and I have talked about it. I mean, so much of our high school era, because, when you're young, things don't go as fast as they do as an adult, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like one summer to the next feels like an eternity.
Mm-hmm.
But like to have something go on, even though it was only for a short lived, it was like what you did in the summer. If you lived in Los Angeles, like you were at Ballistics on Thursday night.
And it was a turning point for a lot of people, because a lot of people, they were a part of this thing when they're like, 14, 15, 16, 17. And then they're coming out of this thing, 17, 18, 19. There's a lot of growth that happens right then.
Yeah.
You're not the same person. You're kind of stretching your legs, and then all of a sudden you're like almost an adult. You know what I mean?
I mean, 100%. I mean, I look back, I definitely was out and about and hitting all the clubs from like, you started at Alfie's Soda Pop Club. My dad dropping me in the middle of Hollywood at 12. So
and what was wrong with our parents? Like, it's so funny.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a 19-year-old who's away at college, and I still wouldn't let her go to Ballistics. You know what I mean?
The amount of shit that our parents just didn't look at, and I will say this is a whole other podcast episode, but I can go on and on about Gen X and how fucking shafted we got.
Yeah.
Because we did raise ourselves. We were very independent. We were acting like little adults at a very young age.
Yep.
We're post 70s, the only thing that changed, we did not, as an age group, we kind of missed out on like Tinder and free love because we had the AIDS epidemic, which was a whole other fucking can of worms. Like we were all.
We did, but now there's like a whole new generation of us who are like post-divorce on Bumble. We're having the summer of love, it's crazy.
Right. You get it now, but we missed out on that a little bit. I'm okay with it. I was strangely prudish, believe it or not. But it is interesting. Like I had no guardrails, and we'll get into that another time, but I know that your house was very welcoming. You had an amazing family, but your house was kind of like hangout central. Like you didn't have a strict household, but you had an actual, like, almost, I know your dad, passed when you were 15, 16, but you had your older brother, you had your sister, you had your mom. So like there was something very familial about your family, which I didn't have. I was an only child with divorced parents who hated each other. So for me, I loved going to your house. I would sit in the kitchen, talk to Kathy for hours. I loved your brother, Mark. I mean, I felt safe there.
My mom wasn't like, it wasn't like a free for all that we could do anything we wanted.
No,
but my mom felt like if they're going to drink a beer or they're going to smoke a joint, I'd rather have them do it here than do it somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not that she was like okay with everything, but our house had a kind of an open door policy. There was always food in the fridge. There was always, stuff in the pantry. It was a fun place to hang out. It was a nice big house. We had, basketball hoop. We had a pool.
You had a pool. You would throw I remember you threw a surprise party for my best friend at your house. You were that kind of guy. And do you remember that? Tiffany had a surprise party.
Vaguely.
But your mom and your family in general, like I could go over there on my own, and if you weren't home, they'd be like, "Well, just come in. He'll be home in a bit." And that was kind of how it was,
I'll tell you something funny. I actually ended up putting locks on my bedroom door because I'd come home and I'd find friends like in my room going through my CDs. And
you did have a cool room. You had like a media center.
I did. I had a really cool room, but I just I ended up putting deadbolt locks on my bedroom door because I was tired of coming home and finding people going through my shit.
That's
Um,
funny. So,
yeah,
like after, obviously there was a lot of success that you had with like
yeah.
ballistics in high school, which is interesting to have something that was a monumental,
I peaked at
like,
17.
well,
Yeah,
ditto. Mine was 15, so maybe
yeah,
23. I don't know, but I definitely already peaked.
yeah.
But it feels like, that was big success at a young age. And
Yep, it
then like,
was.
what do you do with that afterwards? What did you do after? What was your
You,
path?
I really wanted to work behind the camera. So I really did kind of focus on that for a few years. And then I also borrowed some money from my mom and I invested in Dublin's. If you're around in the
Yeah.
90s in Hollywood, Dublin's was a big club.
Yeah.
The guys who owned it were actually a couple of our security guards from ballistics and good friends of mine. Through the 90s, I was, kind of working in production and trying to get some of my own projects off the ground. I had this investment in Dublin, so I'd go hang out there on the weekends, and we could do a whole podcast on some of the fun stories from that. And then, my mom passed away when I was 25, and for a few years, I just kind of didn't do anything. I inherited some money, and I just didn't do anything. I was just kind of having fun, and I ended up getting married and having some kids, and I got into real estate, and then kind of had a shift from there. I met a great guy who got me back into music venue operations scene. And then it's weird, I've maintained this friendship with Nick Adler through 30 years. He's in the restaurants and does music festivals. And when I left my venue operations job, I've been kind of working freelance again for Nick, doing stuff with his festivals and actually looking to expand that role right now.
I'm hoping that we get to talk to Nick because I too have my old stories with Nick. I have it somewhere. In 1986, I was 9.
Yeah.
I just turned 10. The Roxy, Lou Adler used to put on these big, big Halloween. This was back when like everyone thought razor blades were actually in the candy. So he put on this giant, like safe Halloween festival that had rides and horses, and they would have these Halloween pageant contests, and I won with Cisco or Nick one year.
I think with Nick, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
And he, like, I've known Nick since it wasn't until we became friends that all of a sudden I started becoming friends with Nick as a teenager.
Yeah.
But I still see him once in a while. He's really good friends with another friend of mine. His wife is. So it's like, even when you don't have somebody consistently in your life, they're connected to you in some way, shape, or form in Los Angeles.
Yep.
And Nick is a great guy. And he is one of those success stories that here's a guy that had means that really did something with it. And there's a few kids like that really were able to take what they were given by happenstance, right? Just good genes, and turn it into something really spectacular. And Nick is one of those kids that you would never know what he came from. He doesn't act like that. And he's always been consistent with that.
Yep.
And I really admire who he is as a human being. So
you're
very lucky that you get to hang out with him more than I do.
He's a good dude. Yeah.
He is a good dude. And so is David. I haven't seen him in a while either.
Yeah.
So, after, like, what's going on with you now? Like, as you mentioned, you were married.
So I had a property management company. And I was selling my company and was looking for something new to do. And a good friend of mine was working for a company that was taking over the Queen Mary at the time, and they were looking to expand the entertainment venue and music venue there. And I had kind of this unique background of not only working in real estate, but also some nightclub operation and my friendship with Nick, who was, working for Golden Voice, which was, one of the largest promoters and producers of music festivals. And then I've been working freelance for Golden Voice and for Nick and on some other little projects since then.
So really all of the relationships that you kind of grew up with, and I love this because I do feel like guys are like this too. They like stay with like their crew that they originated with. You're still friends with everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty special.
My core group of friends have really just been the same since I was a kid until I was a teenager. Picked up a couple more in my 20s. It's funny. I just keep adding to the collection. It's a tight group. It's a small group. But I just kind of add to the collection. I don't really, I've been friends with the same people through the years. Yeah.
So I do have one last question for you, and this is a tough one, but obviously being raised in Beverly Hills, there's certain aspects to it that you kind of take for granted, right? Like growing up with money or like just having access or living in a really nice house. How has that affected like adulthood? Do you still live in Beverly Hills? Like, how does that all like come together for you?
And it's funny, we could do a whole nother podcast on that too, but yeah, and I've lived in a 5-mile radius my entire life. I grew up at Sunset and Benedict Canyon. My mom sold that house when I was 25. I moved to a condo on Doheny in Sunset, and then got married, bought a house at Beverly Glen in Mulholland, and then got divorced, and now I live in an apartment on Beverly Glen in Wilshire. And money is not the same as what it was when I was a kid. Right. My parents, basically, and all those places where I lived are basically either in the heart of Beverly Hills or on just the outside border of Beverly Hills. Yeah. But money's not the same. My parents bought their house in '68, I think, for around like $200,000. My mom sold it in '98 for around $3 million. And, now that house is worth, 10, 12, $15 million.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's such a weird thing to grow up in it and then realize how hard and inaccessible it really is, because again, I could go on and on about Gen X, but like what our parents didn't have to have, 10 years of salary to buy a house. It was really just a different time. Like you didn't have to have the same amount of money in the bank. And now I think for us kids that were raised like that, it's very eye-opening to go, oh shit. Yeah. This is a totally different landscape that we're playing in, especially in Los Angeles, which is still one of the most expensive cities in the world.
Money's just changed, it's just changed. It hasn't sustained the same way, but I'm out here hustling and grinding every day, trying to make something happen. So that's what it's about.
Totally. Well, I am so glad that we are doing this. It's taken us a bit. Dan and I have been friends since high school. He often sees my dad when he goes golfing. So we've got a lot of like great people in common, including family. But this is going to be a little journey for us to go down some rabbit holes with some of our friends that we've mentioned on today's show. Hopefully we'll have Nick Adler and David Faustino join us at some point. I very much enjoyed getting to know a little bit more about you and some of how this played out for you. And on the next episode, it's my turn.
Yes.
I always have a lot to say. So
I'm excited about that.
We'll see if I can stay on tangent.
Awesome.
On task, not on tangent. No tangents for me. All right. That is it for us today on 90who10. Thank you for joining. Please join us again. We are going to see where this takes us, but hopefully there'll be some good stories, some things that resonate with you. And if you're, born and raised in LA, then I'm sure you know exactly what we're talking about. And let the
give us a call. We'll have you on the show. Yeah.
Totally.
Awesome.
Totally. All right. Peace out. Audi 5000.
Yeah.
Ballistics.
That's it.